Hey guys, it's Penguin here, and welcome back to another gold making video. In today's video, with the War Within right around the corner, we're practically 2 weeks away, less even if we count early access, we're going to take a deep dive into blacksmithing. Now, as always, we're going to be covering the basics like recipes, profession equipment, specializations, leveling, etc. But we're also going to take a look at profession stats and how you need to be very careful where you put your specialization points to make the most gold possible in the War Within. And this method that we're going to talk about really applies to all professions. So even if you don't want to use blacksmithing, you can apply this to engineering or jewel crafting, enchanting, etc. But that means we have a lot to cover in today's video, so feel free to grab a snack, grab some coffee, sit down, and enjoy. As always, timestamps will be down in the description, just in case you need to skip around or if you have limited time. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy. And as always, starting off simple, let's talk about best in slot profession equipment, and blacksmithing, as always, is very simple. One of your accessories, the Artisan Blacksmith's Toolbox, is going to come from blacksmithing itself, as well as your tool, which is your Artisan Blacksmith's Hammer. Then you're going to either need a leatherworker, whether that's your alt or yourself or a different player, and you're going to need to get yourself the Earthen Forge Master's Apron. All of these should be pretty easy to obtain. You can use the work order system if you want. Of course, you're going to be limited by how much artisan acuity you have, but obtaining these profession equipment as soon as possible will be very, very important. At the very least, make sure you pick up the grain versions in the meantime to give you a little bit more stats and everything as you craft. Up next, we have recipes, and while this list does look large, it's not nearly as bad as some of the other professions we've already taken a look at. A lot of these come from the same types of sources. At the top here, you have all of your different profession tools and accessories that you can craft. Most of them come from the vendor inside of the main city for 150 artisan acuity each. You also have the skinning knife that you can craft, but this is a delves drop, very similar to some other recipes we've seen with other professions. We also have a handful of weapons, so all of these charged items you see are different weapons, and so one of them comes from the Awakening the Machine event. Another one is actually simply just purchased for Artisan Acuity. Another one is another event drop from the theater. And lastly, we also have another vendor, but this is from the City of Threads, which is going to cost you 150 Artisan Acuity, as well as 1500 Kedge, which is one of the new faction-based currencies. Outside of that, we have the Skeleton Key, which also comes from the City of Threads, costing the exact same, and we also have 3 different embellished gear. All of these come from a variety of drops. This is kind of a mix of weapons and gear. We have the Bulwark, which is actually a treasure drop from the Challenger's Cache. Then we just have a basic world drop. It just says World Creatures, and this is the Sanctified Steps. And then we also have the Siphoning Stiletto from a boss drop right here. So depending on, best in slot list, these might be very, very valuable. And of course, we'll just have to see exactly what people want once everything comes live. Then the only thing we have left on this list is just your basic PvP gear. Because this is blacksmithing, you have plate armor, very similar to, all the other armor professions, but as a bonus, you also have the weapons. So you can either purchase these for 7,500 honor apiece at the PvP vendor, or you can simply buy the recipe off the auction house once people post it because it is BOE. And alright, with that out of the way, we can dive into recipes. And the good news is that while there's a lot on this list, it's pretty simple to understand and it's pretty basic. So you have a lot of options, but it should be pretty easy to get. Up first, as always, you just have a bunch of different alloys. This is going to be your basic crafting reagents for blacksmithing, and you have different tier levels. This is very similar to Dragonfight, but at the very bottom, you just have your core alloy, so your very basic, like the first thing you're going to craft. Then we have the slightly better version, which is the Iron Claw alloy, then the Charged alloy, and lastly, we have the Sanctified alloy. All of these basically correspond to the type of item you're crafting, so your high-end, BOP crafting gear is of course going to use Sanctified alloys, while your basic leveling gear will use the lesser tiers. The one thing to note is that this Echoing Flux is a vendor item, so definitely buying a bunch in bulk is going to be nice, especially if you're a goblin with the racial bonus, because that just means, cheaper crafting cost all around because you get very, very cheap flux. Up next, you just have your basic BOE gear that you can throw on the auction house. All of these, we have the developed pieces, which all require level 80 to wear, and then you have your slightly lesser level pieces right here, so level 71, 71, and 71. So nothing super special about these, but this can be a great way to get some first 10 bonuses, also to level your profession, and these are BOE, so you can craft them at high ranks, throw them on the auction house, and make some extra gold. Up next, following that same trend, we have the basic weapons, so same thing as before. These are all your BOE versions, so feel free to craft these and throw these up on the auction house as well. Also a great way for some first craft bonuses. Then we have all of our basic profession equipment, and blacksmithing has a lot. So you can be crafting a lot of tools as well as a lot of accessories for a lot of different professions, especially your gathering professions. So kind of like we saw in the recipe list before, we have the basic version of the skinning knife, we have the basic sickle, basic pickaxe, we have the leatherworker's knife, blacksmith's hammer, which you can use yourself, the needle set, the leatherworker's tool set, and also the toolbox, which you can use yourself as well. So these are all the basic versions. The list that we saw before is the better versions, but yet again, this could be a great gold making opportunity. Moving forward, we don't actually have that many more trainer-learned recipes. These are all recipes at the moment that we can get simply from leveling up our profession from the trainer. And up next, we have this Waystone. Now, Waystones, these existed in Dragonflight. This will just give you a buff to either your profession tool or your weapon, and these do nice if you like the region-wide auction house. Keep in mind, this would have a lot of competition. In Dragonflight, it suffered a bit because the profit margins were pretty thin, but we'll have to see how this performs in the War Within. Up next, we have frameworks, which frameworks are basically finishing reagents with a fancy name. So right here, this one increases multi-craft when crafting blacksmithing, leatherworking, engineering, or inscription recipes. Then right here, we have a different one, which increases resourcefulness. So depending on the cost and the reward, these could be worth crafting as well as using in some of your other crafts as well. Then lastly, just kind of a helpful item right here. This allows you to repair an item fully if you have blacksmithing. So this is kind of one of the utility perks that you get as a blacksmith. But alright, moving on to a little bit more of the fancier items. Up first, we have this ever-burning ignition. Now, I'm going to leave this be for just a second. We're going to go back to this, but this sort of concept with this ignition is very similar to the shattering that we saw in enchanting. So if you're familiar with that, this is a very, very similar concept. But up next, we have our basic BOP armor. You'll get this through specializations, but you have one for every piece, so that's pretty normal right here. If you want to look at crafting cost, feel free to pause. Up next, we have the basic weapons as well. So right here, these are kind of the charged items that I was referring to earlier. A lot of these come from specializations, while some of them do come from special sources. For example, that face smasher comes from the vendor. So it just really depends on the item. But as you can see, these are using that high-end alloy. Actually, both of the high-end alloys, and these will likely be pretty expensive, especially if this Beast Fang, which comes from skinning, is pretty expensive as well. Of course, we don't exactly know how drop rate and supply is going to work out, but you can kind of think of this Beast Fang as like the obsidian cobra skin of the War Within. So if you enjoyed cobra skin, you like the pricing of that, you can kind of think about that as the same thing for this Fang. Moving on, we have our specific embellished gear. Everything we saw above is all of the unembellished gear, meaning people can customize it how they want, but there are 3 different special pieces, and these all come from the special recipes list that we saw at the beginning of this video. Up first, we have the shield, which feel free to pause if you want to read that ability. Then we have the feet, which is these sanctified steps, and lastly you have this one right here, which is your dagger. So depending on, best in slot list, these could be very, very valuable. It ultimately just kind of comes down to tuning and all of that. Then, getting close to the end, we have all of the higher versions that we saw earlier of the profession tools, a lot of these coming from that vendor for 150 artisan acuity each. Then we have this fun hammer, which makes a comeback. This also existed in Dragonfight, and it just allows you to repair one of your pieces if you're also specialized in crafting that piece. So, this could be very useful. It really just comes down to if you're a plate wearer. Of course, if you're a blacksmith but you wear cloth, it's not going to be that big of a deal for you, but it could be something useful, and you immediately unlock this once you hit max blacksmithing level. Up next, we have two more waystones, or the razor stone as well. This one right here is going to increase your gathering, so this could be very useful for the gatherers out there. And then this one is just another attack power increase for weapons. Then we have all of the PvP gear that I mentioned above. So right here we have all of the plate armor as well as different weapons, including shields and all of that. And then we have one more final finishing reagent. This right here increases ingenuity. You can use this for blacksmithing and engineering. And then lastly, we have our good old skeleton key, which is going to allow you to open some lockboxes. So definitely a nice thing to have. You can also sell these, but it's just a little nice thing to have. But yeah, in terms of recipes, that's basically it. It seems like there is a lot on this list, but it's really just because you're dealing with armor and weapons, but that just means you have a lot of options. And if you don't want to deal with any of that because you hate the work order system, you don't want to dive into any of that, you can specialize in alloy making, specialize in those waystones, finishing reagents. There's a lot of things to craft. And so kind of shifting away from the basics, let's talk about leveling. In terms of leveling, blacksmithing actually is pretty easy. However, there's a big catch. By just normal trainer-learned recipes, you can easily hit 60. And of course, at the start of the expansion, that might be pretty expensive, but with quote-unquote cheap items, you can make it to 60. And what I mean by cheap, I mean crafting this kind of basic armor. Once you hit 60, you kind of get into a trouble zone. Technically, with trainer-learned recipes, you have the opportunity to craft this sanctified alloy. However, it's going to be extremely expensive. And that's really just because of these tinder boxes, which at the moment has the possibility of being multiple thousands of gold, because right now they're only found in treasures. So this could be a very high value item. On top of that, you just need alloy, you also need some ore, null stones, vendor, things add up. But generally right now you could technically level all the way up to 80 out of 100 with these alloys. It's really just going to come down to how much gold you're willing to spend. Most people watching this video probably won't have enough gold to actually do that, but it is an option if you want to avoid spark crafts or time-gated crafts, which we'll talk about in a second. But that's okay, because you do have other options. The more traditional route is going through crafting orders, right? So you have the opportunity to either craft armor or weapons, which is going to give you 3 skill points each. You also have the opportunity to craft profession equipment, so if that's the route you want to go, whether you craft it for yourself or other people, that's a possibility. And some of these like PvP stuff also give you a few skill points, so you could also grab these recipes and try to craft these, but they won't take you all the way to 100. However, something that I skipped over just a little bit ago is this ever-burning ignition. How to get this recipe is extremely simple. If you go over here and look at the ever-burning forge and unlock this, you immediately gain this recipe. And what this allows you to do is use one of your artisan acuity, so that is going to be a limiting factor, as well as some other items, and you're going to craft an ignition. Keep in mind this is a cooldown, so yet again that's going to be another thing you gotta look out for. At the moment, you can craft one every 2 hours, and this is going to give you bonuses towards crafting. So very similar to enchanting when you shatter a item and get that shatter essence, this is going to give you a ever-burning ignition buff. So right here for 30 minutes at the moment, because we don't have any sort of specializations, this is giving us basically nothing, but when we crafted it, we gained a skill point. And this ignition will get you all the way to 100. So you could just mass produce these ignitions to get you all the way to 100, but the issue is that you're limited by time. right? You can only craft one every 2 hours. So let's say if you need to craft 10 of them, you gotta wait 20 hours to do that. So that's definitely the cheaper option, but it's going to take a lot longer because you have to deal with time. So once again, it kind of comes down to, do you want to spend gold to kind of power level, or are you okay with taking the slower, cheaper route? Some people will have to take the slower and cheaper route, but at the end of the day, you should theoretically be able to hit 100 pretty easily by either of these two methods. And alright, with a quick character change, we can actually start diving into specializations, and we're also going to talk about making gold with this profession, or really any profession in the War Within. Starting off, we have the Ever-Burning Forge, which we just looked at, and immediately upon unlocking, you're going to gain that ignition recipe. From there, as you put in more points, you're basically just going to get more buffs for ignition. So this right here, it charges that reset 25% faster. So this would increase, or I should say decrease, your leveling time. Once again, it resets faster, extra charge, resets faster, extra charge, resets faster, and finally you'll gain 2 extra charges. So if you're really going for that speed leveling and you don't have a lot of gold, you theoretically could throw points into here, and also you'll be able to craft more ignitions, which can lead to better crafting buffs. From there, this is basically your generic tree. So over here we have our ingenuity node. So as you put in points here, you'll get more and more ingenuity, and this ingenuity only applies whenever you are actually using the ignition, which is why that ignition recipe is so powerful. This right here is just the same thing, but for resourcefulness, and lastly, you have the same thing for multi-craft. Now, the thing is that anything you're crafting with blacksmithing, you're going to want to put points into the generic tree. Because it doesn't matter if you're crafting weapons, it doesn't matter if you're crafting reagents, finishing reagents, whatever you want, those things are going to benefit from profession stats. However, it of course does come down to exactly what you want to specialize in. What I mean by this is if you're crafting something like a piece of gear, obviously multi-craft cannot proc. So multi-craft, throwing all of your points into multi-craft when your goal is to craft a bunch of armor doesn't make sense. Additionally, we need to talk about ingenuity. On the outside, ingenuity and concentration looks great. If you're low on skill, instead of just settling on a lower quality item, you can make up for it with a little bit of concentration and up your quality. Generally, what that means with an increased quality, that means more gold. However, we have to be careful with this. Unlike Dragonflight, everything that you can craft in the War Within is guaranteeable. What I mean by this is if you are familiar with Dragonflight, you had to rely on inspiration. So inspiration was super important to spec into because you couldn't reach a quality 3 without proccing. This is no longer the case in the War Within. As of right now, for example, I have a maxed blacksmith. In terms of skill, I have 100 out of 100. And if we take a look at specializations, which we'll dive into more in a second, I have maxed out alloys. All that took was 20 points into alloys, 30 points into forges, and 30 points into means of production. If we take a look at this alloy, I am only 40 points away. You're probably thinking, alright Penguin, but you're 40 points away, and that's because I have no profession tools. If we go back to that best in slot profession list that I showed at the beginning of the video, if you have all 3 of them, you gain 40 skill. So if I had those 3 tools, I could guarantee a quality 3 of this alloy. Of course, I also have to use quality 3 materials. If I drop down to quality 1, my skill drastically drops, but if you are a maxed out blacksmith with maxed out tools, maxed out specializations, and maxed out quality, you can guarantee alloys. And these all share the same recipe difficulty, so you can max out all of these, once again assuming you're using max quality reagents. What this means is if you get to this point where you're maxed out everything, concentration and ingenuity don't really matter. What that means is that if you're at this point, you can just keep constantly come out with quality 3s where you don't have to rely on concentration or ingenuity anymore. Now, the only caveat is, of course, you have to get to this point, which can take some time, especially if you're not doing anything, alt army crazy related. If you're just kind of progressing as normal, this will take a few weeks to achieve. But also, if you're somebody who, is just kind of casually doing professions, ingenuity and concentration still might be the method you want to go. Some people just can't be bothered to max out their profession, they're kind of doing this on the side, or maybe you want to use lower quality reagents. If you decide to do any of those, you just don't have the max skill, or you want to use lower quality reagents that are cheaper, you're going to have to compensate with concentration. Which is fine, you can do that. You just have to remember that you're going to be limited in crafts. If you have to spend 200 concentration per craft, let's say you don't get lucky with any ingenuity pracs, you can only craft 5, and then you have to wait for all of your concentration to come back, which just means you're limiting yourself. So at the end of the day, it really just comes down to the type of gold maker you want to be. If you're trying to be the best crafter ever and trying to min-max and always guarantee quality, then you can kind of forget about ingenuity. And this kind of works, like I said, for all professions. But if you want to take the more casual route, where you only want to craft a few things every few days, or maybe you want to kind of set this up with alt armies or something, then of course you can kind of throw ingenuity and concentration in there, especially if you want to experiment with, instead of using higher quality mats, which are going to be more expensive, maybe experiment with using quality 2s instead. Things like that you definitely can try, but it's just going to add up in your concentration cost. As always, do remember that this is beta, things can change, but at the moment we're 2 weeks away, and this is kind of what things are looking like. But as always, yet again, do keep in mind this is beta. I would not be shocked if they fix things on release day or patch things. Blizzard is known to do that. But that is the generic tree, so moving on, we have means of production, which is everything non-weapon or armor combat specific. So like I said over here, this is fully alloys. Thankfully, this is very, very simple. So if you want to max out alloys, it's literally just alloys, middle, and top node. This is just going to give you a bunch of skill. This right here will allow you to use finishing reagents. This middle, yet again, is just going to give you more skill in multi-craft. Then lastly, up here, you're going to gain the ability to craft your toolbox, which is one of your high-end profession accessories. More skill, and then over here, just more skill. Instead of alloys, if you want to focus on frameworks, which were those special finishing reagents, instead of going into this alloy node, just switch it and go over to frameworks. If we go over and take a look at this framework right here, yet again, we are about, quick math, 13, 18 points away. And if I had the profession equipment, I would be way over that. So yet again, this is very easy to guarantee. Then if you want to go the stone route, then we have the tool stones, which is the profession related tool stones. So if we go over here, we're really just talking about this razor stone right here, which increases your gathering. And then you also have the 2 weapon related stones. So yet again, all you need to do is max out the top, max out the middle, and then max out whichever side you want. This is just going to allow you to unlock the recipe, a bunch of skill and finishing reagents. Same thing over here. So recipe, skill, and finishing reagents. Keeping that same theme over here, we have profession tools and then profession accessories. So if you want to max out tools and try to make, the most skill possible, over here we have the top, the middle, and the node over here, which is going to give you the ability to use optional reagents, a bunch of skill, and finishing reagents. Over here we have the accessories, so same thing, a bunch of skill, and right here finishing reagents. This middle node is going to give you your hammer recipe, so that's your high-end tool. Then just a bunch of skill, and then some ingenuity at the end as well. Moving forward, we have the weaponsmithing, which is very straightforward. I know I'm kind of zooming through this, but you can pause if you want to see each individual node, but it's very straightforward. Anything you want to do, you're going to have to max out this main node if you want the most skill possible. Then you have the option to kind of go the bladed route or the hafted route. So over here, you have your short blades and your long blades. This will just unlock some recipes, give you a bunch of skill, unlock another recipe, your Everforged dagger, some more skill, and then finally you can have your master. Hammer will actually allow you to repair your short-bladed weapons. Same thing over here, you're going to gain your longsword, bunch of skill, your claymore recipe, your hex sword recipe, and then finally your master hammer buff. If we move over here, you have maces, so this right here is your mace recipe, a bunch of skill, your invoker recipe, and then your buff yet again. Then finally, you have axes and polearms, which is going to allow you to craft your great axe, a bunch of skill, over here your halberd, and then finally you have your buff as well. So yet again, I know I'm going through this fast, but it's pretty straightforward. If you want to craft maces at the most skill possible, you go top node, middle node, and bottom node, and then you are good to go. Last but not least, you have armor, which works the exact same. This is very similar to tailoring or anything else, where you really just need to pick the exact node you're going for. In this case, what I've unlocked is armor smithing, and I've maxed out the full main node, which would also allow me to, grab a few other recipes. Then I went for sculpted armor, because this applies to helms, shoulders, as well as boots. This allowed me to use optional reagents and embellishments. Also just gave me a bunch of skill and also the ability to use finishing reagents. Then finally, I maxed out the shoulders, which allowed me to actually craft the Everforged shoulders, then gave me a bunch of skill, and lastly, allowed my hammer to actually repair that as well. And if we wanted to take a look at these shoulders, I did do some crafting off camera to show this a little bit better, but as you can see, we do have 2 of these blue tools right here, so that's 11 skill and that's 18, so that's about 29 out of the 40 skill we could get from the tools. And then also, I'm not using fully maxed out because it's very hard to craft these alloys on beta right now because I don't have that extra tool. But even at this case, we are super close to that 490 mark, so even with just one more alloy or, even with that one more tool, we'll easily be able to guarantee that quality 5. And even if we added in, the high-end crest right here, this would give us plus 20 recipe difficulty. Even then, we'll still easily be able to do that. Remember, this right here, these alloys are 40% of your recipe difficulty. 40% skill comes from quality of items. So even if we can just get even just one more quality 4, that's definitely going to up it. We can actually do that right now. If we go over here and craft like 2 more of these alloys, we should see our skill significantly change. Let's actually do 1 more. There we go. If we go over here, yeah, we're now already past, we're already guaranteeing without even the other 2 ingots that we need or the item right here, we'll easily be able to hit that plus 20. So yeah, that's just a scenario. This right here will give you like plus 5 if you use a high-end embellishment right here, and then this over here, this will do like plus 5 too. So yet again, you'll easily be able to guarantee armor, just showing you that you technically don't need to go into concentration and ingenuity if your plan is to be a full-on spec'd out crafter. But yeah, at the end of the day, that's basically it. These nodes are just going to allow you to use optional reagents and just give you a bunch of skill. Every single base node is just going to give you that basic recipe, and that's kind of it. And so to just recap blacksmithing, I think blacksmithing is going to be a great profession, especially if you want to do any sort of profession tool or accessory crafting. There are a lot of options. On top of that, for the auction house players, there's a ton of options there too. You have alloys, you have the frameworks, you have the PvP gear, which PvP gear might be a little bit weird this time around because crafting is a bit funky, but that's potentially a good opportunity. We also have the stonework items, but even just like basic profession equipment can be sold on the auction house, and all of this basic gear as well, which could be great for some beginner crafters. Then as always, if you are going the work order route, you have armor, you have weapons, you have embellished gear, you have high-end profession equipment, lots and lots to craft. And at the end of the day, remember, whatever specialization you're going into, you will be able to guarantee that max quality. So if you want to kind of play the long, slow, and steady race, you can go straight for skill, 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 and don't really worry about your ingenuity perk. Do remember, you are whatever path you're going to take, you're going to want either multi-craft or resourcefulness. Resourcefulness is going to help a lot in those work order items, so your armor, your weapons, your tools, and multi-craft is going to help a lot with your alloy crafting. Like we said, these alloys will probably be very expensive, so getting a multi-craft proc and getting a few extra alloys per craft is going to increase your profits a ton. So even though I said don't necessarily worry about ingenuity, these other traits, this trait altogether, this forge, is going to be super beneficial. And like I said, that applies to all professions. All professions have a way to get ingenuity and concentration. All professions, 99% of recipes can be guaranteed. There might be a few outliers, but basically almost all recipes can be guaranteed, at least at the current time in beta. But yeah guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful. I know we're getting closer and closer to release, so do expect the other two professions. We have leatherworking and engineering left. Those will be out later this week, but thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. Let me know what your plans are for the War Within. Are you going to do blacksmithing? Are you going to do a different profession? Are you doing alt armies? Let me know. We can have a discussion. But as always, thank you so much, and have a good day.